Love has many different forms, and many of those forms of love are actually based on conditions. And so in the earlier stages of growth, when we think about love, like when we're younger, maybe, teenage angst, for instance, although it can happen kind of at any age in life, but that's one of the times we might think about this. But in earlier stages of growth, we might experience love as primarily a way to feel validated or to feel whole. This can create a love that's clinging, that's based upon attachment to another person as a source of love or wholeness. And it's at that stage that the notion of soulmates can become the most misunderstood, because this can create this sort of seeking, clinging attachment to the idea that there's someone else that holds the key to me experiencing love, to me experiencing happiness, that I cannot have that on my own. I have to have this other person in order for me to experience that wholeness and happiness. And so that's a very early stage of real strong attachment to one's own ego, to the idea of being separate, to believing and thinking that my happiness and my love exists outside of myself, and that I'm trying to find that in the world, and that without what I find in the world, that I am not going to be able to experience those things. So that's an early stage. And certainly, even as we get older, we might still have little clinging parts of that, little karmic patterns that show up about that, where we start to feel little bits of insecurity or clinging or chasing and those kinds of things. But what tends to happen for most of us is that there's also this expression of a more mature human love that starts to happen, where we start to learn based upon kindness and nurturing and caring and tenderness. And these types of love express as emotional connection, as vulnerability, as our learning a capacity to kind of open our heart, to be vulnerable, to feel love, to feel kindness, to feel, ultimately we're tapping into our deeper true self, but we're still having a little bit of a limitation around it and some humanness. One example of this type of love is actually like a mother to a child. If we have a good quality mother, at least the archetype of mother, we'll put it that way. The archetype of mother is one who is loving and accepting and supportive of the child to grow up, to evolve, to become the best version of themselves. And so there isn't so much the idea that I as a mother need validation, or that the child needs to behave a certain way in order for me to look good, to be happy, although that, of course, can be experienced as part of our human experience. But as an archetype, the mother is there to nurture, to grow, to help them become the best version of themselves, and then to send them out into the world feeling whole and happy and ready to face the world. So that's one type of love. And then, of course, there's the love of more romantic kind of lovers, friends, family members, siblings, various different forms of love that evolve. But within all of these human expressions of love, there's also still a little bit of level of conditionality to a varying extent. Sometimes there's lots of conditions in it, and sometimes there's not a lot of condition to it. But there tends to be a little bit of conditionality that still exists. So if you're feeling hurt by someone that you are caring about, whether it's friends, lovers, whoever, then you might have a little bit of an inner condition where, like, I'm hurt by you right now, and I'm going to shut down my heart a little bit. I'm going to withdraw my connection, and I am going to wait for there to be some sort of connection to get restored in order for me to get back to feeling like I'm in a safe place. I can be kind. I can be nurturing again. I can open into this experience a little bit more. That's kind of the more common stage for most people, especially as we get more into our mature adult years. So those are the first two stages. But when we start to look at the expression and the experience of really tapping into the deepest understanding of love from the perspective of it being my true spiritual self, my true nature, a part of my wholeness, we start to look at this final spiritual evolution of love that reflects the true nature of ourselves as spiritual consciousness, our true self. And this opens into truly unconditional love. And because we are used to the clinging versions and the human versions, it's sometimes hard for us to really wrap our minds around the idea of unconditional love. And sometimes in human practice, unconditional love can look like we're setting really poor boundaries, that we're tolerating people's behavior in ways that we probably really shouldn't be, because we think that we're being unconditional, but we're really letting them not treat us correctly. But at this level of unconditional love, we start to experience that love is not actually an emotion. It is the beingness. It's who you are. It's what we are. So it doesn't turn on and off based upon conditions. It's just a radiant expression of the self, of the being. So it radiates from your presence to anyone and everyone that's around you. It's an expression ultimately of your own inner being. It's just a natural, like you've let down the walls that have prevented this part of you from radiating. And so it just is the thing that you are. It's not something you have to do, you have to think about, that you have to control, that you force. It's just your relationship with yourself, your relationship with life and the experience of the world. At this level, love is no longer an emotion, it's no longer an action. It is an experience in a state of just pure acceptance, pure receptivity to everything that's happening, because it's no longer personal. You no longer have conditions that are based upon, I will be happy if you behave this way. Instead, it's I am experiencing everything that's happening. I know that whatever you're doing isn't personal. I still can have discrimination to say, that your behavior might harm me and I'm not going to deal with it, but there's not going to be a judgment about it. There's still discrimination of choosing what does and doesn't work for us in terms of our experience. And so at this state of pure receptivity and pure acceptance, love is radiated to others and to life itself, because it's seen as a reflection of the divine, that others are seen as a reflection of the divine. The experience of life is seen as a reflection of the divine. Even the ups and downs of war and peace and tragedy and love and bliss and beauty, all of those things are woven into the acceptance and unconditional love. There's no conditions placed upon what it has to be. What's the story have to be? What does life have to be giving me in order for me to be able to experience this expansive state of bliss and love? So there's no judgment, there's no conditions. And it is the awakening of this unconditional love and acceptance for ourselves and for others that can create rapid healing, growth, and transformation, because we're inviting the truth of our being to express itself. We're actually connecting into the core essence of who we are and inviting it to open up. And so part of the tantric path is us recognizing this true nature as being part of ourselves, connecting to it as deeply and consciously as possible, and then being willing to look at all of the limitations and the obstacles that arise that prevent us from holding and sustaining that experience of unconditional love, of peace, of bliss. And that becomes part of the work. Is I open into a state of deep bliss and peace, and then at some point, some karmic trigger pops up and reminds me that I have some other version of this, and I contract a little bit. And I notice that, and I become aware of it. And by unconditionally loving that contraction, I'm able to free myself from that contraction as well and restore myself back. And the more we do this, the more that experience of our deeper peace, unconditional love, and self becomes our home base. And we become less and less affected by the things that are happening outside of ourselves, the storylines, the conditions that arise. But there is a process in all this, because we have to be able to ultimately change and transform our karmic relationship to everything we've been experiencing, freeing ourselves from those limitations so that we become more and more open and connected to this experience of our deeper true self. Why this matters for us as those that are exploring spirituality is the recognition that if we're sincere about consciously evolving our spiritual nature, then inviting a deeper connection to our natural capacity for unconditional love is an incredibly important step. It is literally cultivating and inviting an expression of our true self. It brings about a natural experience of peace, love, joy, and wholeness, which arises from connecting within our true self, not from some outside source, but from something that we cultivate and awaken within ourselves. We don't need something outside of us to experience this. And in fact, we begin to expand into everything outside of us being a reflection of that true nature of who we are. And so it cultivates acceptance of what is. As we become more connected to unconditional love, then it's more easy for us to be fully present to whatever is happening. Even if someone is angry or sad or joyful, or there's tragedy around us, or love or beauty, we can accept it because there's this unconditional love and acceptance for everything as a reflection of just the divine play, of the divine experience. And so that ability to be fully present and accepting of whatever arises, and it helps to calm the emotional roller coaster that we sometimes experience, especially earlier in our journey. There are multiple tools that are really important and powerful as a foundation for us to be able to learn to manage our emotional states. Sometimes that's some of the first stuff that needs to be worked on the spiritual journey, because we need to learn, how can we not allow ourselves to be thrown around by the goings of the world and our expectations and the conditions that we placed upon people and the hurts and those things. How do we shift our relationship so that we're coming more from a place of the experience of our true self that's peaceful, that's loving, that's accepting? And so when we cultivate this, it's a remedy to the mind's conditioned processes and responses as well. So the more fullness we feel within our own wholeness and our own self, and more love we feel within ourselves, then we naturally stop believing and seeking love outside of ourselves. And we also want to be able to have the remedy where we start to remove those conditions of the mind, where we have various different expectations and rules in our mind of, I can love someone if, or I will be loved when. Those things start to dissolve, and instead we start to just drop into an experience of our own self that evolves over time. But this is part of the awakening process.